Thank you, Randy. I will just hand over the host. That doesn't stop me doing anything, does it? No. Okay, Randy, you should have that. Good. Excellent. Okay, so as I said, good afternoon, everybody. We have about 45 minutes together. We've just come out of a 45-minute session. I saw some of you there. Thank you for joining that. And Ben did say it felt a bit like sort of speed dating. It was a bit rushed, but lots of content. So it might feel the same, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Please fire up your comments, your links, your questions in the chat. I'll keep an eye on that. So my name's Sam Baker. I work with Business Declares. Together with Ben and Samantha are on the line as well. One of the things I'm particularly interested in is degrowth. We've just had a conversation on that. And I think sort of within that, I'm super interested, obviously, in the role of technology and digital. So I used to work at Deloitte, and certainly, digital / technology was certainly seen as one of the big growth drivers of our clients and therefore the broader economy. So I'd like to just very briefly introduce the two people who are going to sort of lead us through their perspectives. So the first is Rafi. I used to work with Rafi. So he was the global head of telco, media, and technology at Deloitte for sustainability. And he then went on to work for one of the big tech companies, and he's now working for Pineapple Partnerships. So sort of super interesting and relevant experience. And really the question I asked Rafi was just sort of to reflect, I guess, sort of top down on what's going on and what's happening, not least because, we've had the, carbon footprint of the hyperscalers talked about. We did a report together. We were under enormous pressure in 2019 to say that there was going to be no increase in the emissions footprint of the ICT sector. Of course, there's been a massive increase. No, I'm going to say no shit, but that was going to be rude. Sorry. So no surprise there. Then, so really just a sort of a view on that, on some of the sort of the big challenges, and of course, to the extent possible, and maybe the audience can help as well, is think about how we sort of bring those lessons back down to us and what we do. And then Randy, so that's really, I guess, the almost the production side, maybe for Rafi, and some bits about usage. But then we sort of go to the other end of the cycle, and we think about the pollution and the pollutive sort of capacity of the industry, which of course is absolutely enormous. And so we are privileged to have Randy here, who's just authored a report on that topic, really to hear his perspectives on circularity in the industry, some of the vicissitudes at the moment that we see, but also perhaps some of the hope for solutions. So with that, please, Rafi and Randy, or Randy and Rafi, whichever, short intro, very short intro on who you are, particularly if I got it wrong. And then we will move into sort of a 10 minutes of perspective from each of you. We'll keep the questions running in the side. I'll keep an eye on those, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion and debate with both of you. Okay.
Randy, after you.
Randy.
Okay, right. So my name is Randy Adjei. I am in Accra, Ghana, and I've been working with Footprints Africa since 2019. I am the environmental specialist for our organization. My work has been focused on supporting companies rethink their business model so that they understand beyond profit making, there are so many ways they can give back to the community and also help, avoid degradation of the environment and see how they are involving their suppliers within their whole thinking of helping the world become a better place. And it's really a pleasure to speak to you this afternoon, morning, depending on where you're currently. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, I'm Sam Rafi. So as Sam mentioned, we worked together at Deloitte for many years on sustainability and tech, and then went into the big tech sector before last year joining Pineapple Partnerships. We're a small think-do consulting firm looking at systemic problems, shared ventures between corporates for system-wide problems for sustainability. So should I kick off, Sam? It'd be great as people that have joined, if you're able to sort of share mini introductions in the chat and your angle on this topic, so we can respond and adjust it accordingly. My framing for this issue, I think I'd say, is the sustainability or lack thereof in tech is one of the biggest examples, maybe outside the oil sector, of corporate greenwashing or the effectiveness of corporate marketing when it comes to sustainability that I'm aware of. At Deloitte, I was, as mentioned, it's relatively central to the discussions and debates around sustainability in tech, and we kind of bought the lie hook, line, and sinker, I think, that the tech sector had committed to being sustainable by virtue of the investment in renewables, and saw it as a sort of solved problem when it comes to sort of scope 1, scope 2 emissions. What we weren't, what we sort of lacked an understanding of at the time, it's a few years ago now, but what we lacked understanding of at the time was really how untrue that was, and also how problematic the scope 3 side of the business model is. So if you think about the sort of tech stack, we're on a Zoom call right now. The Zoom is an application that is hosted on the internet in the cloud, which effectively means that there are servers in warehouses around the world, or wherever this is hosted, probably in Ireland, which is a warehouse full of a kit, full of stacks of servers in which are chips or semiconductors that host the application and the storage underneath the application that enables this to exist. And that warehouse, that data center with those stacks of servers, that is effectively one massive power use, energy hungry building. It uses energy for keeping the data center cool, which is a big problem, which is a big big challenge when all this kit is going, and also in actually literally just powering powering the servers themselves. They tend to be increasingly big in size, taking up more and more land, and the expected growth of data centers around the world is basically exponential. If you look at the sort of growth plans of hyperscalers, that's the value of these companies is based on a prediction of this exponential scale. And at the moment, the only thing that's stopping that is the prevalence or lack of prevalence of chips, and maybe some land use. Definitely not investment, and definitely not demand. So when it comes to sort of sustainability agenda of these companies, and please do throw in questions. When it comes to the sustainability agenda of these companies, that they all have net zero ambitions or carbon negative ambitions, some of them, which were made to great fanfare a few years ago, and only now this year we're starting to see the reality come back to bite when the reports from this year from Microsoft and Google, yet to receive one from Amazon. Well, Amazon has come out, but doesn't really disaggregate from AWS, which is part of the challenge, are starting to show an uptick in absolute emissions. The story that these companies tell is that the carbon intensity is reducing. That for every gigawatt of energy or you use to gain more computing power as a result. That's partly to do with the increasing efficiency of chips, which Moore's law and all that kind of stuff enables, but that doesn't in any way mitigate the scale of the growth in the actual number of data centers and use. And part of that is driven obviously by AI and use of generative AI and predictions for that. I'd say it was very chastening for me when I dug into the decarbonisation plan of the company I was working at, and I saw that it was all based on carbon intensity, and then asked questions about the absolute emissions. And actually, the forecast in absolute emissions, even though this company has a net zero ambition, was to basically more than triple until 2030, to the point at which it would be the size of a small absolute emissions would be the size of medium-sized European country, which means that any amount of offsets is not really possible to actually deliver that. So I do feel like this is relatively poorly understood, even though it's starting to get out there in the world, and start to be stories around this about the challenges around sort of digital pollution or whatever. It's still, because of the marketing power of these companies and because of the story they tell, it's poorly understood. One of the reasons for that, and one of our focuses that me and Sam worked on at Deloitte, is really because there is a positive story to be told around the need for technology to be deployed in order to drive the transition, to drive the change that we need across sectors. And data and the use of data is really going to be, has to be a part of the toolbox in terms of what we do, how we do things differently. And at the moment, there's still, while some of the marketing and some of the positioning of these companies touches on this stuff, it's still not really central. They haven't quite gripped this as a concept, but I would imagine that they will, because it is relatively straightforward to tell a story about the role of data in enabling managing hotspots for sustainability, or automation, or general digitization as a means of improving efficiency. So that side of the story is still in the ether, but I don't think is quite it. We haven't quite seen in the way that we might have done, both because the use cases and the usage isn't quite there, and also because companies just aren't really focused. They're not so committed to it. Sam sort of asked me to sort of reflect on how this whole story around the sort of hyperscalers, pulling the wool over our eyes, plays into the poly crisis, and plays into this sense of challenge for business. I think first of all businesses, particularly platform-based businesses, are using these services. You hear about sort of VCs thinking, the hyperscalers see VC, the money coming out of VCs into software companies going straight into their coffers. The VCs are basically funding the hyperscalers. Like this is a sort of phenomenon that we're seeing increasingly across the system. And so there's a question for us working in business as to like how do you reflect on the the direct relationship between investment in these businesses and the implications of the use of tech? I don't think there is an easy answer. I think the most important thing to do is to be really, really critical and detailed around the information that you get back. So of the hyperscalers, there's varying degrees of quality of information that you get back in terms of the emissions associated with your use. Some are much better than others. And actually now there's increasingly more granular information on where you can store your data in the most energy efficient way, basically in data centers that are near renewable energy production sites, effectively. So if you're interested in sort of deploying data in a way that's most sustainable, you need to get into that level of granularity and go to sort of local level, figure out where your data is being used. The other thing to say is obviously there's a sort of social impact side of the growth and proliferation of tech. I think maybe Randy will go a bit more into that. That's another big issue that I think at the moment is in the ether, but as yet understood, poorly understood, particularly around conflict minerals. That's probably my 10 minutes, I think. Is that right, Sam?
Okay, so look, if I can ask just one question, there's lots of stuff in the chat. It's a bit sort of overwhelming trying to pick out a question from that. So I think what we'll do is I'll ask one question. We'll go to Randy, and then what we'll come back and just raise your hand if you want to ask a question. I think that might be well, it'll be the easiest for me anyway. So I guess, Rafi, my question is, so without a doubt, the footprint is very challenged, and you've talked about that and why it's there. When we come to what tech then gets used for, you mentioned some sort of positive elements to that, and some of that's in the chat as well. I suppose my concern is, tech costs money, the most efficient and effective, the best use of tech, if you like, the best tech costs lots of money, that people are going to afford that, are the big organizations. The big organizations are bought into the existing system, and that's how they've got big. And so really, I don't have any confidence that the net impact of technology is in any way going to be positive. I think at the moment, the way it's constructed at the moment, it means that it just accelerates the existing system and the incumbents. So my question, simple question here is: are you optimistic? So do you feel that actually?
I think it's worse than that, actually. Sorry to say, because the business model, particularly the way that cloud computing is constructed now, the business model is so sticky that anybody that uses those services, it's incredibly difficult to extract yourself from them. So not only is it expensive, but it's actually it's a pseudo monopoly or oligopoly. It's one in which you're not able to really release yourself. Down the opposite side to that is it is in a way democratic. It's by definition accessible to anybody. Like you can open a Google Cloud account now and create a some sort of digitally enabled product in minutes. So that is amazing, and that is democratizing. But to your point around expenditure, I think is worse than you said.
Yeah. Thanks for cheering me up. Right, Randy, over to you. Stage is yours.
All right, thank you, Sam. Please confirm if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Very good.
Great. So as Sam mentioned, we have authored a report looking at the other side of technology. So we wanted to understand, the nature of the e-waste crisis, across the world, but focusing on Africa, looking at what is happening here. And for us, this research was an eye-opener. For the kind of work we do lots of remote work. So from the internet, we are using the laptops, all these devices. I mean, we cannot, avoid the consumption of electronics, which I'm sure is common for all of us, because how the world is now, we need these devices to communicate. But even beyond that, for our cooling, heating systems, these are all things that we have to depend on technology to be able to achieve. But the thing is, technology is really advancing at a really high pace. Phones, for example, we have Apple releasing models like every year, so it's very easy for the waste to be generated. And looking at all the waste streams that exist, e-waste is actually one of the fastest, growing waste streams. Now, the thing about e-waste is, um, generating waste from your devices is one thing, but its production came with, loss of waste generation, loss of resource usage. So the whole thing about generating waste is one thing, but you have to also look at the production side of things. You have to look at all the efforts that's going into it. So if our devices are becoming waste, it means we are wasting all the efforts that went into its production. So this whole topic is very crucial. And for me, I'm hoping at the end of this session, we are able to rethink how we consume electronics and also look at the roles that we play when it comes to managing its afterlife. We want to see what we can do so that the kind of world we want to see, the kind of circular economy we want to transition into, and we want to look at our businesses individually, what we can do to make this a possibility. To give a quick background on what we do at Footprint, since 2017, our work has been focusing on promoting sustainable practices, and we do this by advancing the adoption of circular economy and helping with Africa's transitioning journey. But we understand how crucial businesses are in this whole journey. We understand the role that they play in helping Africa transition. So for us to enable this, we run programs that are helping these companies again rethink their business models and embed sustainable practices within their operations. They are adopting circular economy practices to help them see the kind of mission that we have as a company, which is for companies to understand beyond profits, they can be a force for good. Now, aside this to be see circular economy to be one of those things people think is too conceptual, and the best way to explain how things work out would be through case studies. So for us, we have mapped over 500 case studies across Africa, which you can read about on our website. We are hoping this would provide knowledge about what is happening, but also give some sort of exposure to the challenges that these organizations are facing. Now, beyond that, we want people to understand it's not just about talking about making impact, but to help these companies measure their impact. We have round two programs that is helping the companies measure their impact and let people understand how different their operations are from linear models. Now, moving forward, I spoke about e-waste being like a crisis. Currently, the waste that was generated in the last reported data was 62 million. And usually during these presentations, we try to question our participants just to see our thinking around what is happening. But out of curiosity, if you were to be asked what the current projection is for 2050, what will you say the e-waste generated worldwide would be by 2050? Just a random thought. If you can put your responses in the chat box, that should be great. By 2050, what are we anticipating our e-waste generation to be? So currently it is 62 million a year, but in 2050 it is projected this will rise to 104 million. Now this figure is interesting because this is almost double the amount of waste that was generated in the last reported report data, which is 2022. This is almost double, but our population is not anticipated to double. So which means we are generating more waste than our population is increasing. So it is very crucial to look at what can be done to address this whole e-waste generation. And for Africans, we do a good job with how we use electronics and how we avoid e-waste being generated. If you look at the average European, the amount of e-waste an average European is generating is 7 times that of the average African. And speaking to people during our research, you realize for repairs, for example, if people are to bring devices that are obsolete, devices that the owners are not interested in using anymore, rather than sending this to the landfill, they keep these devices around and they use the parts to repair other devices. So as much as possible, they are helping to keep these, equipment in use for a really long time. But even for the users, they try to repair it as much as possible. They try to see ways that they are extending its usage. And even if they are not using it, they try to see if they can give it to someone else who may find a use in it. But this is not enough because currently, even with all these efforts, e-waste is still being generated. Now back to this whole question. Currently, our e-waste generated here in Africa is 3.5 million tons. Can you guess what percentage of this figure is being collected and recycled? If you were to give a quick guess, again, in the chat box, that should be good. The figure is less than 1%. And I mean, like I said, we are doing a really good job trying to make sure e-waste is not being generated, but the recycling rate is really poor compared to other continents. Africa has the lowest, e-waste recycling rate. So it raises the question about what then can be done. Now, comparing the e-waste being generated to what is being recycled, we can see the vast difference. And even though this is seen as a challenge, we want to see how this narrative can be flipped into an opportunity. Because this huge figure we see here is not just a challenge, but it's an opportunity for people to extract valuable materials that can provide jobs, that can provide, the needed materials to produce new items. We look at urban mining. You can see so many opportunities here in Africa. So the question is, what then can be done about it? And here, for Ghana, for example, when speaking to people, whenever people generate waste in their various homes, we have informal workers called e-waste collectors who go around, they try to collect the e-waste from houses. Sometimes they have to pay money for it, but there are some individuals who they're just trying to get rid of the e-waste, so they give it out for free. Now, when the collectors get these materials, they either right away try to extract valuable items from it, or they send it to aggregators who then sell it to recyclers. Now, typically what they do is, because not every item in these e-waste, obsolete devices are useful, they try to dismantle it and see if they can get copper or other valuable metals, and they will sell those ones. So for whatever they find valuable, they will do cherry picking, and what is left then becomes waste. There are times where the dismantling is so difficult that they have to then burn off the plastics to get access to the metal. And we can think of all the various challenges this is producing. We have health issues. We have people who are doing this work without the proper PPEs, but it's not something that you can easily get rid of, because if you can see from the corner here, you see someone selling food, because it's for those who are doing the recycling. This is a way for them to earn money. So we have that social benefits, but all the economic activities happening around, this is what people are benefiting from it. But we have challenges like child labor, which is very easy, very difficult to get rid of. So we were thinking, so what then can be done? This is the issue that exists, but it's not that simple. If you look at the informal sector, they play a crucial role when it comes to e-waste management. But to ask again, if we are to guess what percentage of e-waste management is done by the informal sector, what will our guess be out of these four options? 10%, 30%, 60, and 90%, if you are to take a quick guess. So the figure is 90%. So it shows how important the informal, sector plays in e-waste management. In Ghana alone, 97% of e-waste management is done by the informal sector. And because of how informal they are, it's hard to apply the right structures. It's hard for auditing to be done to make sure what they are doing is meeting the right environmental criteria. So for us, with this whole research, we're then looking at solutions that can help address the e-waste being generated, but also solutions that are sustainable, solutions that are practical, and not ones that we are seeing to be like a long-term goal. So from the reports, just to extract an interesting point to make, we see in this context, end-of-life solutions for electronic products are generally geared towards extracting valuable materials and discarding or burning everything else. So it's really hard for people to, meet the environmental criteria and also to make money out of it because the value of the material they're getting from the product is less than, the cost of doing proper recycling. So thinking about the solutions, we then tried to see how e-waste compensation could help address, this whole problem. And with this, our case study was on closing the loop. And the work that they do is if you are in Europe, for example, and you are to buy a device, a percentage is added to the cost, which will then be used to do proper recycling or recovery of e-waste being generated, in a region or a country where they lack the right recycling systems. So you buy a phone, for example, and an equivalent of the phone you purchased will be used, will be collected from these countries or regions where the right recycling systems don't exist. So we wanted to see how this system is also not just addressing the issue of e-waste, but it's also helping with our transition into a circular economy as a continent.
Okay, sorry,
And with that,
Randy, just to interrupt, we got a couple of minutes and then we'll.
right.
Oh, yep.
Okay, so to quickly go through what we learned about the compensation scheme, we realized even though it is helping to properly address e-waste, it cannot solve the issue alone. So we look at systems like EPR. All these things have to come together to help address the issue, but EPR is not enough. We want to see how people can adopt the whole e-waste compensation system in high, volumes so that more e-waste can be collected. But also, with all this being done, we want to see the right policies so that producers are not only looking at recycling, but they want to ensure reuse and repair. We also find it very, necessary to understand the data regarding e-waste recycling, e-waste collection, just so we can see the true cost of recycling, so that if we are to invest money into this whole system, we understand how much money is needed. But also, like I said, this is an avenue to create jobs and to drive innovation. So this is something that we are hoping can be done, just so the crisis that we spoke about can be addressed. But for us at Footprints too, we are looking at how the companies that are in the formal sector can be supported so that more work can be done when it comes to proper e-waste recycling. And from our survey, looking at some of the companies from our case studies, we realized their key need is business accelerator support. So, internally, we are also exploring how this can be addressed using these options that we are hoping it can be seen. So, the report again is live. You can get this from our website. But if you have some specific questions based on this presentation, I will sure do answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Yeah, and congratulations, excellent report. Really, really good. So again, lots of stuff in the chat. So do put up your hand if you want to ask a question. I'm scanning the screen. I think that there's an opportunity here for Randy to ask Rafi and vice versa, but I will just ask a question, Randy, if I may, of you. So it seems like so first of all, super interesting, obviously the focus, all the data, but I was struck by the picture where you had the massive ball and the very small one. Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's just such a disproportion. And so I guess two things, any sort of reflections, I suppose, on the big ball, which says, one is, the responsibility of the producers to design in the ability to then, reduce to make it easier. But then second, that behavior, I mean, it's us, it's me sort of, putting that in the drawer in case I need it sort of, and I never do, and going and getting another one, right? So any sort of reflections on that? Because I know you've got other case studies and other work.
Yeah. And like you said, we have to rethink, how we consume electronics because it's very easy to buy something because it's fancy, but asking questions like, how long will I be able to use this? Looking at its durability, you want to ensure that whatever you are buying will be the last thing you buy when it comes to that particular product. So the next phone you buy will be the last phone you use, but that can only be possible if they make it easy for you to repair. For example, there are phones where you can just pop out the battery and replace it rather than going through all the complexities of like taking out the back of a phone, just replace the batteries. For some people, they just give up when the batteries are giving them issues. So just trying to see how the brands that we are buying from are making it easy for us to extend the use of our devices. And if for nothing at all, there is a system in place where they are providing after sales services. So if not us, individually, these brands are providing the needed support to repair it. And when it's not in, it doesn't have any value for us anymore, these brands are taking it back to produce other useful products for other consumers.
Thank you, Ram. What else have we got? Any questions, anybody? Rafi, a question for Randy or vice? Oh, Ben, I see a hand up there. Let's.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't work out how to do it electronically for some reason, which is slightly ironic. Yeah, I've got loads of thoughts on this, and I might not be very articulate, but yes, we have to cost in externalities and deal with the payment of the waste. So the product, if the product's $100, actually the true product might be $300, right?
Right.
So I get that. We also have to have laws to stop built-in obsolescence. And I think the French have possibly passed one so that we don't build something that breaks in 3 years. We try to extend it. So I get that. All good stuff. But I can't help thinking that we also need to stop the constant proliferation of this tech at the same time. And I just don't know how we do that in a world that's increasingly powered by tech and all of the stuff that we get from it. And I just wondered what your thoughts were about the slowing down or the stopping or the degrowing of some of this proliferation. We've got to tackle that bit as well, surely. What do you, Randy and Rafi, think about that?
Right. And it's very true. Previously for watches, for example, we had these normal analog watches, but now we have a watch for just, running, taking our health, data. We have, new Googles, we have headphones, like so many of these things. But sometimes it's easy to get one device that is performing all these, functions that we are hoping to get from the devices we are purchasing. So it's not just about thinking about buying products that will last for long, but buying products with multiple uses. But then again, these brands, they try to, create products with, problems that we never thought of. But once we see these products, we force ourselves to believe that this is a problem I have and I must get that particular product. So just rethinking how we consume products is very necessary. As much as possible, we want to get that one product that can perform all the, solutions to the problems we believe we have. But we shouldn't fall for this whole gimmick where we think we need a separate device for every problem that we think exists. So that whole thing about, looking within to see what we are doing wrong and trying to correct it by looking at the circular economy in this particular sector is very crucial.
I'd add to that to say that there's a trade-off here around the role of technology. So, a lot of the applications or the proposed applications for how technology is going to enable sustainability is driven by greater collection of data, whether that's sensors, particularly Internet of Things, IoT devices. Thinking about farming is a good example. If you want to know what's going on in your field, you need to have some sort of way of accessing that information. You have some satellite, but you'll have a lot of on the ground. You're going to be putting a bunch of sensors in your field. That's a bunch of kit that wasn't there before, but that's going to help you to be able to use your tractor in a more efficient way and know when to use, how much fertilizer to use or whatever. So there's going to be trade-offs like that across the whole system, which means that we have to make choices about the use of kit. And I think again, the system isn't structured in such a way that allows for sophisticated discussion about that. And most of the sort of big telcos and things like their whole future business model is predicated on the proliferation of IoT, 5G being a sort of root enabler of the use of that.
Yeah, no, thank you. So question for both Randy and Rafi. So I think, Rafi, in your report, you talk about sort of perhaps the most sort of mature end of cycle would be to then take it to an advanced smelting facility. Or I might not be using exactly the right words. And I think at the moment there might be one in Nigeria, but if there is, there's only one on the continent. And so it might, you might say that much of it has to be then re-exported, if you like, back to Europe. So just reflecting and thinking about that, have I got that right? And it seems, yeah, that seems bizarre and ironic, I guess, given what we're trying to achieve. And then Rafi, just to you sort of along those lines, you mentioned land is one of the big issues. Do you have any knowledge of where all those data centers are being built? I mean, obviously we hear about Iceland and parts of the US and et cetera, but is there much building out in Africa? So can we just take Randy first? And
sorry.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know if I got the question right, but when it comes to recycling facilities, the work that Closing the Loop they are doing is looking at mobile phones and seeing how it can be processed after its end of use, end of life. But the problem is to meet the right environmental criteria for, recycling battery screens, the phones, printed circuit boards and all. We don't have such recycling facilities in Africa yet. So usually when they do the collection, Africa, the role that we play will be the collection storage, and it gets transported to Europe where the recyclers who are meeting this environmental criteria is. So we are hoping with mass adoption of this compensation scheme and also integrating other financial instruments, we can then set up the right facilities here in Africa. So we are reinvesting in local economies. We are avoiding the associated impacts of doing the transportation of these used devices to Europe. So that is one challenge that we have for mobile phones. That particular recycling facility we are hoping to see doesn't exist yet, even though there are plans to get that done, especially in Nigeria, but that is still a work in progress.
Thank you, Andy.
Can I add something to that? Would you mind if I make a comment?
Yeah, please.
So one of the reasons we actually were brought in to do this report was, I think what you're dancing around slightly there, but maybe not overtly saying, was there was an accusation of the business model we were looking at that it was just another form of colonialism, because effectively they were taking what was valuable of the electronics and they were taking it off the continent to Europe, and that's where the value addition was happening. And this is something we see time and time again in a lot of processing where the value addition happens off the continent. And so what the company wanted to understand was, is that a fair accusation, or what they felt they were doing is setting up the supply chains locally, engaging the informal sector in safe processing in such a way you can build the volumes, you can build the data to then have enough information to make the investment locally in local processing. So that was one of the actual origins of us doing this piece of work, was to understand, is that happening? Is that going in the right direction? So it's a really important question, but I'm just going to make it overt for you so you don't have to dance around it.
Well, thank you.
And to your point about a question around where the data centers are going to be, it's actually, I think, interesting where they're not yet. And that's obviously basically Africa and Southeast Asia is the primary sort of gaps globally. And some of that, I think, is partly to do with availability of renewable energy sources. Like when they are choosing location, one of the defining requirements is access to renewables. And so there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation here where, where's the capacity? One of the big problems, obviously, as people mentioned in the chat, is how much of that capacity is then used up by these organizations, or by us using services on the cloud. So it's a question, interesting to see where that evolves.
Yeah, so sort of skimming the chat, and I'm sure we've all been having a look at it. I mean, this does sort of feed on from the previous session when we talked about degrowth, and ultimately, I think somebody said, Lou, I think you said it, big tech are demanding perpetual growth. Yes, they are. That's what they are. That's what they're focusing on. And so it's extraordinarily difficult in the existing system and the existing way that rewards spill out and fall to imagine anything other than 2019, which is all about efficiency, and we're not really going to grow our footprint, to roll on forward to today when everyone's dropping their net zero, Rafi, as you said, and you've got 30-40% increases in emissions. I mean, it's just it's ridiculous and insane. And I think that the concept of that circularity is obviously super important, and Randy, super important locally, and potentially got some benefit, ironically got some sort of, counter benefits, if you like, or side benefits, particularly socially. But it doesn't, I just can't see any other way than reflect at a system level to say, well, how if those rewards and incentives still exist, then everything else we do is just going to be a little pinprick, to this march of change. So I don't want to sound overly pessimistic, but I guess sort of similar to the question I asked you, Rafi, and maybe both to you, Randy, as well. Perhaps you could just sort of add a few concluding or provide a few concluding comments, and maybe reflect on what I just said as well. So again, I guess it's sort of optimism for the existing system versus the need to change.
I have to go first. So I think this issue is just a sort of case study of why we need to think really sort of in broad terms about sustainability as an issue, and not take what we're presented as read from sort of from the vested interests of the organizations that we work with. And that's something that I learned the hard way, I think. And so what is our response to that? We're presented with a world that isn't as we want it to be. Like, how do we impact it? And I think the starting point is to call it out for what it is. And I think at the moment there's not enough of that. And hopefully conversations like this can accelerate that.
Thank you. Randy.
So again, our report and this core research and presentation, it's not for people to panic, but in a world where people, only do the advertisement marketing, looking at the benefits of what exists, I think it's important for us to also see these benefits of what we are buying. So for us, I hope this is a way for us to understand how our decisions are having consequences on society and the environment, but also to see what we can do to help address this issue, which again, we want to rethink how we consume electronics, and also if there is a way for us to support those addressing the issue, that could be a great way for us to invest our funding. So I'm hoping with this whole presentation and learnings going forward, we are going to think through what we can do in the coming years and coming days to help negate all the issues that we see in this with research and presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Randy. So just thank you everybody for listening in and for a very active chat. So I'm going to save that and look at it later, and we can distribute that as well. Really interesting. Rafi, thank you very much indeed for your comments. Randy, what a fantastic report. So everybody, please do have a look at that report. We'll send around the link if it isn't in Ticket Tailor and afterwards. Yeah, great session. So, and then Vice will be sending around a feedback form. Please do put that in, and perhaps particularly, if there's specific topics that you want to hear and want to hear addressed, we'd be delighted to ferret around and get the same quality of speakers as we've had today. So Rafi, thank you. Randy, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.